Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of the Carolina Weather Group. I am Scotty Powell here. We want to thank you for joining us for our continuing coverage of Hurricane Florence here throughout the North and South Carolina area. We welcome you all watching tonight. We ask that you share this feed out to your friends and family in your timelines that they can also get the latest information. We have the Carolinas covered for you tonight. We have Shay Gibson and Jared Smith in the Charleston, South Carolina area. We have Christopher Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina, myself here in the foothills of North Carolina. And over the next hour, we're going to be giving you live updates on what we can expect for Hurricane Florence here in the Carolinas. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Jared Smith, and Jared's going to give us the very latest from the National Hurricane Center. Jared?
Share my screen here. Good evening, everybody. It's been quite a day. It's been quite a long day. Here's the latest from the National Hurricane Center as of the 8 o'clock intermediate advisory. Hurricane Florence, big storm, 140-mile-an-hour winds, moving west-northwest at 17 miles an hour. It's picked up a lot of forward speed over the last day. As it's starting to get steered by that ridge that we've been talking about seemingly forever. I feel like the ridge and I have really gotten to know each other very well. It's located at 28.0 north, 67.9 west. That is roughly 725 miles east-southeast of Cape Fear, North Carolina, about 350 miles south-southwest of Bermuda. This is not a threat to Bermuda. This is most certainly a threat to the southeast coast. Hurricane watches are up from roughly Edisto Beach up to the South Santee River. That includes Charleston metro area. Inland Berkeley County, you are also under a hurricane watch. Hurricane warnings are up from the South Santee River up all the way into the Outer Banks, where so a hurricane warning means that hurricane conditions are expected within the next 24 hours, and so that includes a lot of this cone here that we're showing here. So here's the current position at 8 o'clock. You can see the wind fields here. The winds, hurricane force winds, extend about 60 miles from the center. Tropical storm force winds up to 175 miles from the center. This is a big storm. You measure it edge to edge from the cloud shield. It's around 500 miles. So, and it very likely could get bigger before it makes landfall. So again, we look at this cone, we look at this track, and we have to understand that it's not just the center that's going to the area where the center is going to pass is going to see effects. We're going to have effects from miles and miles and miles on end. And it's worth noting too that, it's not really shown on this map here, but we do have storm surge watches out for the Charleston coast, and we have storm surge warnings up. Again, roughly Georgetown all the way up into the Outer Banks. So again, next full track and forecast update comes at 11 p.m. Here's a quick look at it in GR Earth. Here's the satellite. In fact, I'm going to take the Hurricane Center track off, and this is just, it's a monster, folks. This is it's got the look. It's got a really good convective structure around the eye here. A very wide eye. Went through an eye wall replacement earlier, and again, this is headed west northwest. And then after landfall, don't really know. It gets interesting after landfall because it's going to slow down. It's going to throw on the brakes, and it could. If some of you have been really freaked out about the models today, and I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't freak out about that, but it very much, we're back in the 5-day cone down here in Charleston, and it's going to be a very, very interesting scenario over the next few days to see how this plays out. So, Scotty?
Thank you for that, Jared. And we'll be watching for the next hurricane update to come out at about 11 p.m. We'll definitely post that to our social media sites here to give you the up-to-date latest. I'm going to hand it off to Shay Gibson. Shay's going to give us kind of an in-depth look at the model runs that's been taking place over the past couple of frames throughout the day. And Shay, the big story today is we've seen quite a shift in the model data, bringing more of South Carolina into a danger zone per se, with models shifting Florence possibly making landfall in South Carolina.
Yeah, that's right, Scotty. We're seeing a little bit of shift. There's some agreement that there'll be a little bit more of a westerly turn today from all the major players. That includes the GFS, the UCMED, and the Euro. So we're going to see if that's going to be consistent through tonight, through midnight. The NHC hasn't adjusted the track too much since the 5 p.m. update. So the changes may not occur till later once they see a little bit more consistency before making a drastic change of anything. Real quick, after what Jared was talking about, this is the mimic imagery. This is microwave morphed integrated imagery from the center of Florence. And so what we're seeing here is the eye wall replacement cycle that occurred earlier. We're seeing a little bit of an eye wall replacement cycle again, as an outer eye wall is forming around what is not clearly a completely concentric band around the core of the storm. We're seeing it on the west all the way around to the eastern side of the storm. So we haven't gotten this really solid red line around the core of the system yet. And so that's why it's holding at 140. We may see some fluctuations in that as well. Going forward, we may see some intensity jump up and down, may go down to 130, back up to 140, maybe even go up to 150 as it continues to head over warmer waters. There is a little bit of upper shear ahead that may have some effect to it, but the NHC is keeping it as a Category 4. Looking at, real quick, I want to mention Bill Walsh is on with us tonight, so as soon as I'm done, I want to get him on because I know he's busy and he's going to want to put in his 10 cents worth to help us out here and talk about the Charleston area. The model guidance, I'll go ahead and share a screen. I don't want to put too much time in deterministic models, but we will go over a couple of those. And what I really want to focus on is the ensembles. This is from Weather Nerds. Here is the ECMWF, the Euro ensemble, the latest one from today, and showing majority consensus of the members pushing into the coastline between South Carolina and North Carolina, and then stalling out. It looks rather disorganized here. If we look further down, we see a little bit of what it's doing, and it's pushing into the coast, slowing it down as it makes it into the coast, and then dropping in a little bit south, a little bit west. And that is pretty unanimous with all the members there, all 51 members, some of them even further south along the offshore South Carolina coastline. Over here to the right, the GFS ensemble, you can barely see it down here in the corner, but nearly the same kind of concept from the 6 o'clock p.m. run. That's very disturbing because if those two are in agreement with that, then and if we see more consistency through the midnight runs tonight, they may have to adjust the track accordingly. Here's the UCMET. And we see the same kind of setup. So the same like stalling at the coastline and dropping down. When we get to the GFS deterministic, we get out here. This is by Thursday afternoon. We see a slowdown in the storm, and then it drops down the coastline. So we're not putting too much faith in that severe drop to the south at this point. But the European model is also very close to that. As we go forward in time, it stalls and then brings it down the coast. So, we have to keep in mind that things will change with the track. If you look at the NAM 3 kilometer, we're starting to get within the 60-hour mark of this. And I'll go back to 0 hours and run it. We'll see this trend. Give that a second to load. Sometimes it takes this one a little bit to load here. We go forward in time. See if I can catch up to it. High resolution models are 1 hour frequency. So let's go forward in time. The NAM brings us towards the coastline. And in the last few frames here, we see it slowing down. And that's another disturbing factor when the high resolution models are starting to come in agreement with this slowdown at the coastline. So we may be concerned that this might not push in as further inland as we thought it would, which would be a relief for folks further inland and also up into Virginia, all the way up into Northern Virginia as well. But lot to be concerned about with that particular track. So this run right here, I want to emphasize everybody in the hurricane watch zone, we are still in the run for this thing to possibly make a run at the coastline. It's on the lower percentile, and the hurricane warnings are up from basically the Santee River, the Winyah Bay area, all the way up to the North Carolina-Virginia border. So we have to keep that in mind. The hurricane warning is where areas will be experiencing hurricane conditions within 48 hours. And then the hurricane watch is where areas could possibly encounter hurricane conditions. So this track is still forecast to have high uncertainty as this storm approaches the coastline. So I encourage all of our viewers not to take everything for granted. What you see with this track down the middle is not exactly where the storm may go. You can see how it widens out here. The margin of error is approximately 110, I think about 115 miles from the last NHC verbiage. I'll have to go back and look. But then it gets even wider as we get out to day 4. So lots to consider here with this track. Very concerning, in fact, with the models are in agreement with that kind of situation from a 6-hour standpoint. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce Bill Walsh here. He's with Live 5 News here in Charleston. And we're going to hear his perspective on what he's been talking about with the audience here in the Charleston area and what to expect in the Charleston area as well. So I'll hand it off to you, Bill.
Hey there. How you doing, Shay? And hi, everybody. It's great to be here. And fantastic to talk to you guys about the hurricane and weather and stuff like that. So I got to tell you, it is pretty amazing so far to watch the storm and watch what we're doing with the storm, because it is. I've been doing this for a long time, and This is a very, very tricky storm, and a lot of you folks know that, and all of our colleagues together, all of us talk about these models, and of course all the different solutions that are coming out with this thing. And today, I got to tell you, it's been very interesting seeing some of these, especially seeing the GFS come around to almost what the Euro solution was, and watching the ensembles kind of come back to the west a little bit. So, and I think the Hurricane Center is probably having a tough time down there, just trying to look at their solutions and whatnot. But yeah, bottom line, this is a very tough storm. I mean, it looks like the organization's good. I think it looks like, and I was talking to a friend of mine on the way I came home for supper, and there's a good chance this thing is just going to, where it starts, that westerly motion is going to be critical. And then, of course, when we lose the steering currents, it's just going to spin around out there, slowly drifting toward the coast, or just staying just offshore, which would even be worse as far as the energy of the storm. So, I mean, there's so many little factors in play, and we were talking about the modeling, and we really, I mean, it's they're having a tough time with this, but I think I will bet you at 11 o'clock the Hurricane Center comes up, and I'll bet you they'll take the last 2 points, maybe the last 3 points, and just cluster them together, because they'll tend to do that if they're not quite sure where what the solution is going to be, or when you look at the forward motion of the storm just kind of coming to a stop almost, or just having so few steering currents. I'll bet we'll see a clustered, maybe a clustered couple of days, similar to what happened with Harvey. There are some similarities with Harvey. I was here, by the way, for Hugo in 1989, and we had 6 feet of water in our TV station, which was by the Ben Sawyer Bridge at the time. And then we had 22 feet of water in McClellanville. And that storm now was progressive. It came through here about 25 miles an hour, had a 19 nautical mile eye or something. And that moved through, and it was picked up eventually. It worked its way around the ridge, and became extratropical, I think, up in New York State. It was quite an inland blow as well. But the thing is, it moved. This one, and looking at, even if you take the track, away, and you just look at the storm motion on this is just so slow on day 3, 4, and 5, particularly day 4 and 5. We're talking about a prolonged event of heavy rainfall. Certainly the winds will be dying down, but after doing the damage, it'll be rain. We're talking some of the modeling on the rain was really impressive. The precip models that I was looking at. So there it is right there. Thank you. Looking at, you're talking 20, maybe 25 inches of rain. We had 22 with that big, with these, what they call the 1,000-year flood. Well, if that was a 1,000-year flood, it's only been a couple of years. So we might be seeing another sort of event like that. So, I mean, again, it is difficult to target, and everybody wants a solution right away. Everybody wants to know, where's the storm going to go? What it's going to do? And, this is a tough one. So it's fascinating from a science point of view. It's fascinating from a tracking point of view. It is amazing to track and watch. But I think we're going to be dealing with this, guys and ladies and gentlemen, for the whole weekend. I mean, if this kind of stalls in place, or just maybe comes up and then stalls, or even does a bit of a loop, I mean, that that could be certainly problematic as far as flooding and whatnot. So we got a long way to go on this storm. So it's not going to be picked up by a trough like Matthew, which was a weakening Category 1 when it came by here. We've had so many of these East Coast storms come up from the south. Long wave trough comes along, picks it up, boom, it goes out to sea, it goes northeast. This thing is a completely different animal.
Bill from Scotty Powell here. From a communication standpoint, the track has been mostly into North Carolina, and I think a lot of folks maybe in Charleston, South Carolina in general, thought that maybe they would kind of get off without much effects. But now, for you, how is it communicating this threat, or how have you been communicating this threat that, hey, we still need to pay attention to this, even though we were seeing a more easterly, northerly jog through North Carolina until today?
That's a great question. All right. So tonight at 5 o'clock, when I started seeing, when the 18Z GFS came back, I mean, we were just standing around saying, how are we going to explain this? What are we going to say here? All right. The Hurricane Center says it's going, it's going to go up towards Charlotte. And now we're going to talk about, well, that might not be the case, and really, you have to tell people, here's the here's the Hurricane Center, forecast. We pretty much go with what they have, but we mention other solutions, other ideas, or other tracks that might be coming that you need to be prepared for. So really, our message is, hey, don't look at that red line. The storm is fluid. It's in a fluid atmosphere. Don't be fixated on, everybody's looking at Wilmington. I got to tell you, this happened, Scott. This happened during Charlie. So Hurricane Charlie, when it rapidly intensified in the Gulf of Mexico and hit Southwest Florida. So when it came up there, the cone, everybody loves the cone. So the cone had Tampa on the left side at one point. It kept having Tampa way on the left side of the envelope, and then way on the right side was, I think, was just around Naples or Punta Gorda, Florida. Well, the media, of course, when you're dealing with people that a lot of times all they do is they see Tampa. So that's a major market. That's a big market, big market. Everybody's saying Tampa, Tampa, Tampa. But, there's a little Punta Gorda on the right side of that envelope. And where did the storm make landfall? Right there, just crushed Punta Gorda. So, people are seeing Wilmington with this one. And they're talking, oh, Wilmington is going to Wilmington. It keeps verifying it's going to Wilmington. But, if we wake up tomorrow morning, Hurricane Center says, well, maybe more Little River, or maybe, something like that. We have to be able to communicate the message to people that there's nothing in stone with this, and it's probably going to change. And same thing with Irma last year, when Irma ended up making landfall down in the Keys. So that's kind of the message, I think, tonight, and everything, Scott. I mean, I think it is to tell them that, look, these are the options the storm has. This is what we think. Don't be, fixated on Wilmington, and always have a plan ready to put into action.
So, Bill, a question for you, and this is a question I've been getting all day. Folks to the south of the storm, what are they going to be experiencing versus the folks to the north? Of course, we talk about wind speeds being stronger along the northern quadrants of the storm, but are folks to the south better at ease, or do you think they should remain on guard and vigilant even with offshore winds? Or what would a southerly track mean for the folks that are a little bit comfortable in what they're doing right now?
Yeah, I think you have to remember Matthew. You have to remember even a couple of storms that came by Fran and Bonnie of the 90s. So, typically your wind distribution, your energy is north and east of the center. But you can have sometimes, especially on these stronger storms, although Matthew was weakening. I mean, if you'll remember, as Matthew went by us, we got quite a wallop on the western edge or southwestern edge with some of those rain bands that were coming around. So they can still carry quite a punch, maybe not go out as far from the center. That was a decaying storm, and this one probably will be weakening a bit as it approaches the coast, but still be it'll still be pretty good structured storm. So bottom line is, you got to say, look, yes, the northeast quadrant of the storm's the worst, but you can still see significant weather, with wind gusts in particular, and very, very torrential rain on the western and southwestern side. It may not go out as far, but I think people in South Carolina or southern South Carolina have to just kind of be ready to deal with this as well.
And Scotty, did you have anything else for Bill? I was going to maybe talk about another subject. I wanted anybody else to chime in, maybe Chris or Jared.
No, go ahead, Shay. I know.
Yeah, go ahead, Shay.
I know we want to. Bill's probably got to get back to the station soon, so go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Bill, you're welcome to stay on as long as you want with us, but I don't want to keep you too long. Any final messages for our viewers and yours alike?
Well, no, I mean, I think you guys are doing a great job, and I'm always glad to jump on here. I actually came home for supper, and knowing that the next few days is always up in the air. We pretty much work 12 hours, 12 on, 12 off. But when the action starts, we're all there typically. So we just sleep there, and then we'll get up, and then bottom line is, I just think it's one to watch. It's going to be really fascinating from a weather point of view to watch this. I just hope that we don't, have a Hugo type of damage from this kind of storm, because a lot more people have moved to the beach since 1989. It's been a long time. I remember walking the Isle of Palms, helping to pick up pieces of, friends' houses and stuff, and that was a nasty storm. So, whoever gets the storm, it's going to be pretty nasty. But from a weather point of view, we just have to keep tracking it, give our best guess, work with our partners at the Weather Service, with you guys and other partners, and just give the public the best information they have to take action. And then the after storm, whatever happens after the storm, we have to cover as well. On the media side, we cover right up to it. That's ours. That's what we're doing. And once the storm is gone and over, that in some ways is a beginning process for media, because they have to continue to cover the cleanup, sometimes up to, stories that last up to a year. I mean, that's, we talked about Hugo for years and years after, as far as, especially for the first 12 months as things got back together, stuff like that. So we'll just have to see. But again, we always I appreciate you guys. I love your Twitter handles. I love watching what you guys are saying and doing and talking. I think the people at home really appreciate that, because, the more opinion, sometimes the better, especially when somebody may see something, and, it's like when you're tracking a tornadic cell or something, we're chatting with the Weather Service, say, hey, did you see this on that scan, or did you see that? Sometimes you're looking at so much data, you might miss something, and it's good to have everybody kind of watching and looking at it. So more eyes the better sometimes. But hey, I really appreciate it. Great to be on here, and we'll all work this together.
Thank you very much, Bill. Much appreciate you coming on tonight. And like I said, you're welcome to stick around and hang out with us if you have the time. If not, totally understand. He did bring up a good point about tornadoes, and tornadic activity goes hand in hand with tropical systems as they make landfall. So we have to be on the lookout for those as well. A lot of times we get these mesocyclonic events that happen very quickly, and we get radar indicated rotations, lots of them. And then by the time they report these rotations and get the warnings out for a possible tornado warnings, they're already over with. So we saw that with Hugo, where tornadoes carved tracks through forests, and by the time like maybe a mile, 2 miles long. So those are very fast events that occur. So be mindful of that if you live in areas where you have weak structured homes that couldn't withstand tornadic activity embedded within rainfall. Even into the south end, the south side of the hurricane, you could experience downsloping winds with shear, which would cause rotations and tornadic activity as well. So we have to be very vigilant about that. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Scotty. Great to have Bill on with us tonight.
Yeah, we thank Bill for that, Shay, and definitely so. We'll talk about individual areas here in just a second. We're going to kind of recap here. It's about 9:23. Over 1,000 some people watching right now. We see your questions. One is specifics about your area, and we'll get there, I promise. We also want to thank the Mother Nature Network for live streaming and rebroadcasting this video tonight. So we appreciate those folks. And I want to hand it to Chris Jackson now. Chris is going to kind of give us some of the up-to-date latest news with the watches and warnings. And then we're also, Chris, you guys in South Carolina have conducted or are still conducting an area-wide evacuation for the entire coastline of South Carolina. So maybe you can touch on that as well.
Absolutely, Scotty. Glad to be here tonight. So yeah, Governor McMaster, of course, issued evacuation order for all coastal zones of South Carolina, and that was for Horry, Georgetown, Charleston, Berkeley, and Dorchester counties, and also Edisto Beach. And when he first issued that evacuation order, was for the entire coastline, and since then has allowed Beaufort, Colleton, and Jasper counties their evacuation order to expire, and basically, people don't need to evacuate. with the exception being at Stowe Beach. And I know this morning they started lane reversals on the I-26 coming from Charleston back up here to Columbia. And I really haven't heard too much. I know I've seen a lot of pictures and a lot of video from social media today that does show a lot of traffic. But as far as a wide-scale state event, I'm not really sure how that's going statewide. But anytime you got a mass exodus of people leaving an area, you can expect some pretty serious traffic delays. And with that being said, I've seen a lot on social media of people that's been a little bit hesitant to evacuate because of their thoughts of not being in the cone. And to those folks, I just want to say that just because you're not in the cone doesn't mean you're not going to see impacts from this storm. It's a big storm. It's huge. And I'm going to share my screen here. I actually made this little graphic up while ago. Get here. All right. So we take the National Weather Service's latest 8 p.m. advisory. And what I did was I isolated the wind fields, meaning I took the tropical storm and hurricane force winds, and without altering it in any way, I basically put it right over the landfall point according to the NHC track. And there you can see how big this wind field is, and it's expected to grow. Then I just move around a little bit, show everyone how big this wind field really is. And so if you put the center of the storm somewhere near Columbia, you have a wind field that covers the entire state, a good portion of North Carolina, some of Georgia. And again, along the coast, much of the same. So it just goes to show that even though you may not be in the cone, that doesn't mean that you won't be seeing any effects, or you should downplay it in any way, shape, or form. If you're along the coast, I beg you to evacuate, please.
And Chris, you're talking about those evacuations, and I see some folks in here saying, well, I'm not evacuating for 40 to 50, 60 mile per hour wind. You're not really evacuating for the wind. It's the storm surge is what you're evacuating for, especially if you live right there on the immediate coast. You run from water, and you shelter from the wind. So yes, the wind there in the immediate coast, if the eye wall comes over you, is going to be extreme. We could see 125, 30 mile per hour wind. But the main concern for the entire coastline of North and South Carolina is the storm surge. So that is what you're evacuating from, is you want to run from the water. Water, as we know, is one of the biggest killers in weather, either flash flooding, storm surge, things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a little bit. I do want to, while we're talking about evacuations, is talk about the ones in North Carolina. Shay, if you'll look in our internal chat here, I've dropped a link there that we can kind of screen share and talk about what's going on in North Carolina. So this is the North Carolina evacuations. If you'll scroll down, there we go. So here it is, all mandatory evacuations. The first time in the history of the state of North Carolina, there is a mandatory state evacuation of all barrier islands along the North Carolina coast. So if you're talking about Holden Beach, you're talking about Wrightsville Beach, you're talking about Topsail Island, North Topsail Island, places like that, is a mandatory evacuation up into the Outer Banks. If you live on a barrier island, or if you are on a barrier island, maybe you're vacationing, it is a mandatory evacuation for you to leave. There's also voluntary evacuations for other counties along the North Carolina coast. Those are the red counties there. And also the green counties, I believe there's also some voluntary evacuation as well. You can go to this website. It's the North Carolina Emergency Management website. You can Google North Carolina evacuations. It's an interactive map. You click on the county and it'll tell you what kind of evacuations are ongoing with that particular county. So again, all barrier islands in the state of North Carolina, it's a mandatory evacuation. That was ordered today. I think it was around 12:30 when Governor Roy Cooper had his press conference. So now we want to get in. I know you have a lot of questions. We want to talk about individual areas. And I'm going to first send it to Jared, who can talk about the Charleston, Charleston area, maybe even down to Hilton Head. Jared, there's some speculation we could see some storm. And then Shay, I'll let you kind of take the North Carolina coast if you don't mind.
All right, sounds good, Scotty. So Charleston, yeah, I think the thing that like we talked about earlier with Bill is that yeah, we know less than we know less today than we did yesterday, and I don't say that to scare anybody. I don't say that, but to freak anybody out. But that's just the preponderance of the evidence. We do have a National Hurricane Center track that is still pretty consistent. It's pretty consistent through the first couple days. Takes a storm into Wilmington. With your traditional, cone of uncertainty there, stretching from roughly Georgetown to, Outer Banks, maybe around Hatteras. And what we've seen today in the models is a suggestion that, and keep in mind, it's not just been today. There's always been some members of the models that have been kind of eyeing the central South Carolina coast. And the Weather Service in Charleston has done a very good job of making sure that everybody understands that it's not just that one, it's not just a center track, but two, we're not out of the woods. We're not out of the woods until this thing gains latitude. And in fact, we might not be out of the woods because it might push south. As Shay showed you with the models earlier, there's surprising agreement in this. And so right now, Charleston, you're under a hurricane watch and you're under a storm surge watch. And what does that mean? That means hurricane conditions are possible within the next 48 hours. This could be upgraded tomorrow. I would expect some sort of upgrade to a warning tomorrow. And so that should be your cue. And that should be your cue alone to, get your preparations done. You're going to have about one really good day of weather left to get your preparations done. And that's it, so we're going to I'm taking a look at Chris's screen share here. And I think that this is, again, this is the key part of the discussion that is super, super, super important. And I'm going to read it out to you guys. The steering flow almost completely diminishes by Thursday night, after which a wide range of possibilities exists. And we don't like a wide range of possibilities in meteorology. We want our models to be cheat sheets, okay? But a wide range of possibilities. The model solutions in the last 12 hours have changed considerably beyond 60 to 72 hours, resulting in relatively low confidence in the current forecast. At this juncture, it is imperative that everyone in South Carolina and Georgia continue to closely monitor the latest forecast information. I believe, this is from the latest AFD from the National Weather Service in Charleston. So, again, what I need people to understand is that you should still be preparing for a major hurricane strike. Category 3, probably, it could be 4. We don't know. And so you should take that and use that as an impetus to get ready. Fight uncertainty with preparedness, and that would be, and that's the best way to go about making yourself safe. Now, evacuations have gone pretty smoothly so far. I've seen a lot of people around today. So again, you have time, but you have about 24 hours or so. You got about one good day of weather left to finish your preparations and get a move on, because you do not want to be caught in the storm here. So anyway, Scotty, that's going to do it for Charleston.
Yeah, interesting point there, Jared.
Yeah.
Now they're bringing Georgia into this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could go all the way down. So I mean, you look at some of these model runs, and they're not, and suddenly Hilton Head, Savannah, you're back in the thick of this. Maybe not for a landfall, but certainly for effects. And I think somebody commented that the 12-0 Euro was like, oh, Henry McMaster, he canceled the evacuation for Beaufort County. Here, hold my beer. I think that was the quote, and it's like it's just that I think that's just been a microcosm of the whole story with Florence. It is it's somewhat unprecedented in the way that it has evolved here. It's been quite an extraordinary storm.
All right, thank you for that, Jared. We'll quickly toss it up to Shay. He's going to talk about the North Carolina coast, and then we're going to bring in Brad Panovich, chief meteorologist at WCNC NBC Charlotte, and we'll have Brad kind of talk about what his thinking is on the storm and maybe some inland packs around the Piedmont and western portions of North Carolina. So go ahead, Shay.
All right, Scotty, thank you very much. For North Carolina, again, I'm going to show this graphic, the storm surge watch and warning graphic. You see majority of North Carolina all the way up to looks like it maybe Duck or Corolla, North Carolina, for the warning and pushing inland all the way up the Neuse Rivers and these river estuaries all the way inland. This is a broad coastal plain up this way. Lots to talk about with this because these areas are going to be heavily inundated with water as the storm surge. No matter which way the storm goes, if it goes even to the west, the storm surge is still going to be firing off the northern and northeastern quadrant of the storm and wrapping into the coastline. So that's going to be a large portion of it. Here's the storm inundation map. And I'm going to zoom in to this area of North Carolina right now. The map layer, this is inundation with intertidal layer, so this is including the tides. And a lot of these folks here, especially upriver, are looking at 9 feet plus for the surge for this system. And that means that the water is going to be pushed up into these rivers, has nowhere to go. So this is going to be a major flood zone. You're talking 9 feet above ground level. This is significant for this kind of a surge for this area. If we go with inundation layer only, even higher numbers, we're looking at greater than 6 feet for a lot of these folks just inside the Pamlico Sound and up to the Neuse rivers and other rivers up this way. So there's a lot going on here. Eastern North Carolina is setting up for a major rainfall flooding event, not only from the rainfall, but from the storm surge and from river swelling as well. Take another look at the WPC QPF, and we can actually get a better look at this with the National Hurricane Center, and zooming in on this. And we're talking at this point for Southeast North Carolina, pushing all the way up into portions of Eastern North Carolina and into portions of Virginia. We're looking at feet of rain at this point, not so much inches. We're talking 2 feet plus. I think these numbers are going to come up even more than this. Some of the models are hinting at that. It's a very big concern because the amounts 2 days ago were significantly lower. Now they're coming up. And the storm slowing down certainly doesn't help anything. In fact, that's going to add a lot more rain to it. So that's for North Carolina as far as the storm surge and the rainfall. Here's our storm track viewer, data scope from WeatherFlow. And the storm track shows as a category 4 making landfall, possibly a 3. We may get a little bit of cool water upwelling along the shelf waters here ahead of the storm. Sometimes you get a little bit of cooling that helps to sort of weaken the storm a little bit, even though we saw it feed off the Gulf Stream. We saw Hugo feed off the Gulf Stream in 1989. We still have yet to see what happens there, but the winds are definitely going to be coming up. Here's Avon Sound. I'm going to run some of the models here, and we see winds significantly coming up with the CMC bringing it up to 60 miles per hour plus. So these models are a little bit low on their thinking. If we go a little bit closer to the storm, let me pick a point a little bit closer. We'll go to Cape Lookout, and let me run some of the models for this one. And we're going to see wind speeds from the Wave Watch 3 GFS, some of these coming a little bit closer, upwards of 70, 80 miles per hour, maybe even topping up towards 90 miles per hour. A couple of models I saw earlier were presenting near 100 to 105 for some of these areas closer to the system. So we're going to be watching our coastal mesonet very closely as well for North Carolina, watching the winds. The wind forecast, the only thing I could really say was hurricane force, because we're just not entirely sure exactly where this is going to make landfall and then exactly what the wind field is going to be like closer to the core. I hope we have enough surface observations where the core is so we can get a better idea at the surface at about 10 meters. Of course, we'll be getting hurricane hunters going in with dropsondes and getting all kinds of data as well. And there's a lot of help going into the modeling right now, which may be why they're in so much agreement, because we have weather balloons going up in every 3 hours from some weather services, 4 times a day at others. We also have oceanic what are they called? I forget what they're called. Sakura's launching them, and they're going out, they're remote control, and they go out into the waters, and they go and they feed information in out ahead of the storm. But the National Hurricane Center, the NOAA hunters, the hurricane hunters, are also dropping sondes into the water to get data. So there's an immense amount of data going into the modeling now from our own work being put into it. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Scotty. We'll bring Brad Panovich into the picture.
Thank you, Shay, for that. And so we've kind of talked about the coastal impacts. We know there's definitely going to be some impacts from Florence there. It kind of gets a little bit iffy now as we move inland. So I'm going to bring in Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich with WCNC in Charlotte, North Carolina. Brad, I know it's kind of making our head scratch on what to expect once we get into the inland parts of the Carolinas.
Yeah, it is, Scotty. I mean, tonight's guidance, as you guys were alluding to, doesn't really help matters. It's kind of fascinating to me that there's so much agreement up to the coast. And then from there, it's like mass chaos. It's like everything just goes crazy. But I think when I see the models do crazy stuff like this sometimes, I think we read too much into it, like loops and all these weird shapes. The models are really telling us that the steering currents are going to fall apart, and that's what that weirdness to the model is. It's not that the models don't know what's going on or there's a lot of uncertainty. It just means that the steering currents go weak, and just like any ship, a listless ship, if you put it into a current that's strong and flowing in one direction, it's easy to kind of forecast where it's going to go. But then when that current stops and it goes into a pool where there's nothing moving, it's just drifting, it randomly drifts. So think that's the concern I have is, where does it drift? And I think for the Western Carolinas, the one thing I'm pretty confident in is I don't think it's going to be a big wind event. This isn't going to be like a Hugo where it comes barreling in at 40 miles an hour and transfers all of that strong wind all the way inland. I think because it stalls, it actually, the wind field is going to break down pretty quickly. It will spread out, but the stronger winds are going to go down pretty quickly. The concern is, the rain, and in the mountains, as you know, Scotty, any kind of upslope flow into the higher elevations is just going to make for a horrible setup. So if it continues this southerly track, if it goes into South Carolina, even south of Charlotte, boy, that's bad news, because that easterly fetch coming off the Atlantic with all that tropical moisture could mean a big flash flood threat. And we just had one in the spring with landslides and debris flows all over Western North Carolina. And I don't want to see another setup like that, but that's the one thing that I fear happening. The other thing I worry about is on Friday, when if it tries to make landfall, I shouldn't say makes landfall because we don't know if it'll make it all the way in. Not much is going to be happening in Charlotte in the Western Carolinas. It's going to be kind of weird. All this news is going to be what's going on the coast, and people in my area in the Western Carolinas are going to go, oh, it missed us. Nothing's going on. And then Saturday will come, and then Sunday will come, and then the worst weather's 2-3 days after the storm initially makes contact with the coast. So I really want people in the Western Carolinas not to let their guard down, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen after landfall, and it's going to be a delayed impact. It will likely be a day or two after the first, impacts are felt on the coast.
That's true, Brad. And like you were talking about, much of Western North Carolina has had just major rainfall events all throughout the spring, and even the summertime. It's been pretty wet around the area, so flooding is a major concern. So for the communication standpoint, with the variabilities in the models, and how are you communicating to your folks on social media and on TV? How are you telling them they need to be prepared for this?
For me, I'm having most people prepare like they would. It sounds weird, almost like for like a winter storm, where, you might be stuck at home for a couple days. There might be power outages, but you don't need to evacuate. I don't know if you've heard of people, Scotty, from our area actually asking if they should leave. And I'm like, why would you leave Charlotte or Monroe or Catawba County? Where are you going to go? That's, are you running from the wind or the rain? I don't really understand. So the way it's a shelter mentality here. You really need to be able to stay in your house in a sheltered location. Obviously, if you're in a flood-prone area, a floodplain or an area that floods, you need to head to higher ground. But most of us are going to be okay in our house, but we might be there a while. So you need to prepare for being at home, maybe without power for a day or two, and you're being stuck because of trees or water in the roadways where you can't get out. So if you're going to get supplies, I think drinking water is the bottled water thing is weird in our area, because we're probably not going to have issues with drinking water. And even if we did, if your water's fine right now, there's nothing that stops you from filling up stuff in your house and storing it. Even plastic bags, you get a Ziploc bag, fill it with water and throw it in the freezer and let it freeze. Then you got ice, and when it melts, you got water to drink. So if you're worried about water, don't go to the store and buy it. Just store it at home. Get containers and store it at home. And then maybe get some extra food for a long weekend where you might not be able to get out. And then we live in such a digital age. I think more and more people rely on their devices so much. The lack of cell coverage or internet or power might have a bigger impact on people having to talk to one another and not actually be on their phone, which might be a pleasant surprise. But yeah, if you're worried about that stuff, getting information, you need to charge all your devices and make sure you have battery backups for everything. That's what I would tell people to do.
Well, one thing, Brad, I was able to watch you during the 6 o'clock news and catch the forecast. The tornado threat, normally with landfall and tropical systems, there's always that tornado threat. And I know you kind of brought that up. It's really track dependent once you get inland in North and South Carolina.
Yeah, if you're just on the east side, and we've seen it, even weak little circulations left from a tropical system that is not, and sometimes it's just a remnant low. It creates such localized helicity that if there's breaks in the clouds and we get some sun anywhere on the east, or in this case, the north side, because the storm's going to be moving west, would have the potential for spin up tornadoes. And then you get the interaction with the mountains on the east side. There's going to be some enhanced helicity with there. And then you're reducing the what we call the LCL. It's basically something to do vorticity stretching, but that's just weather talk for when storms go into the mountains. Sometimes they spin up tornadoes. So we've got to watch for that as well. If the storm especially tracks down into South Carolina, then that would put all of North Carolina, Charlotte, and the foothills and the mountains would be in an area where we could have enhanced tornado risk.
And Brad, I know you guys locally at the station, it's kind of not a wall-to-wall coverage, but you guys are there pretty much for the duration of the event. So kind of tell us, what's your schedule like for the next few days?
Well, today was crazy, and it was only Tuesday. Yesterday, I actually participated in, believe it or not, with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Emergency Management Office. I was in at the EOC taking part in a hurricane exercise that was set up weeks ago before the system even took shape. So we were actually doing a dry run on a mythical hurricane hitting Charlotte, and lo and behold, we have to actually come up with the same thing. So that's been my day yesterday. Today was it's a lot of meetings. I think one thing people forget about seeing us on TV, we have a physical building and people that work at the station that are concerned that we have to take precautions for. We've got to secure our building. We've got to make sure our supplies, then our fellow coworkers are okay. So we've got to plan for that on just a logistical level. So I've been in meetings with my higher ups and even my corporate people about, where are we going to go? Our crew's going to be safe. How are we going to cover this and also take care of our families and make sure we all are fed? And I mean, that's a lot of things that go in. Just like any other business or homeowner, we have the same type of issue. So we have a backup facility over at PBS here in town in case this station should have some kind of damage, catastrophic. We don't think it's going to happen because we're not in a floodplain. It's never going to flood here. But if a tree fell on our transmitter here or something and we had to move, we've got a backup facility and there will be somebody over there just in case that happens. So I've been in a lot of meetings of that, doing a lot of radio interviews, trying to build graphics, trying to be a dad. It's been a crazy week. And here the storm is still a couple days away. So I try to pace myself, but it's really, really hard in these situations because this is a marathon, not a sprint. We could still be doing the same thing next Sunday and Monday, next week talking about this storm. So I got to pace myself and make sure I get some sleep and I'm getting some exercise and that kind of stuff. So got to look out for yourself a little bit in this situation as we get ready. But they're long days. I'm not going to lie, but this is when you're here for people. This is the reason I do the job I do. The reason you guys do the job that you do is, let's face it, sunny and 80 is the easy part. This is where the money's made and where it's hard. You got to be there for people and make sure they're safe. And so I really applaud all the meteorologists out there in the Southeast that are doing yeoman's work to make sure people are prepared for this storm.
I couldn't say it any better, though. We echo those sentiments. Chris, I think you had a question. I'll let you go ahead.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, Brad. I got one quick question. Up and around the Charlotte area, do you know of any of the local utility managers or people that have reservoirs dropping their water levels right now?
That's a good question. I actually checked on Monday. No, actually Sunday night I started checking, and Duke did have water releases scheduled in all their dams. So it looked like they were moving water. I don't know if all of them actually went through, but one of the things in our area, it's been pretty dry, especially in the Piedmont. So moving water down from the mountains and foothills into the Piedmont was probably a pretty good idea to get ready for a possible tropical system. So I think they tried to lower a couple of the lakes by about a foot to give some capacity for that. So I know that was at least going on Sunday. I don't know if they're still doing it today. It's a long process because of the number of lakes it takes to move the water. But I know that was going on Sunday.
Oh, sure. And the reason I asked that, I got a notification from SCNG, the local electric provider and they run Lake Murray, and they're actually doing a water release right now. It started about 3 hours ago, and They're releasing almost 14,000 CFS, which is about a little over 5 million gallons of water a minute. And on their website it says that they're planning to continue this release until further notice.
Wow, that's pretty impressive for Lake Murray too, to be releasing that much water.
I think their powerhouse is only capable of 18 or 19,000 CFS from their turbines.
Man, yeah, because I could see them getting a lot of water in that lake, especially if it does get into western North Carolina. And that's the thing. I mean, we talk about just the water releases around here sometimes raise the water levels on Mountain Island Lake and areas between Lake Wylie and Lake Norman. Sometimes on Riverside Drive, we get some some flooding in that area, even from the releases. So there's always a little people get a little worried when those releases are going. I'm checking the website right now for the lakes up here, and it looks like most of the Oxford Dam did do a release this morning from 12 a.m. and they're releasing all the way till midnight tonight. And it looks like there's another one scheduled tomorrow. So Lake Wiley, the same thing. So yeah, they're definitely, it looks like they're moving water all the way down to Lake Watery. So that's, they're definitely planning ahead, which is good news.
Absolutely, because I know, and the flooding event of 2015 down here in Columbia, we had so many of the local dams and small ponds and stuff like that. Dams had total failures. So it's good to see a little bit of proactiveness going on with the threat that's in our face.
Yeah, it never hurts. I mean, and I'm looking at the 0Z stuff tonight, and I'm like, oh, this. The weird thing is, it's like, if this thing hugs the coast, which would be just insane, if that thing goes down to Georgia, I'm just going to see a lot of people be mad saying, where's this storm you guys talked about up here? But if it goes into the Midlands of South Carolina, man, that would be bad news for us up here. We would definitely have a huge flood threat and definitely a huge tornado threat if that happened.
That sort of brings in, let me share a screen. This tweet today from Melissa Griffin, she's a climatologist, sheds a lot of light on this particular topic. And Brad, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the watershed effect, how we get water upstate, even into North Carolina, that precipitates downstream into South Carolina, to some of the major river tributaries. But what kind of advice would you give if this storm does push further west and drops more rain through central North Carolina into the western zones?
Well, and this is the thing. If you live on any of those river basins, it's that delayed impact that you're going to have to worry about, because a lot of this will fall this weekend. We'll have two flood threats. We'll have a flash flood and area flood threat when the rain is falling intensely over a couple hours, and then it'll transition to the river basin flooding, which could linger into next week, late next week. So one of the things I was trying to do today was try to look up. We have pretty good flood mapping in Mecklenburg County. But the state of North Carolina has a pretty good flood mapping site as well by counties. It's always a good idea to go look at the floodplain and see where you are in relation to that floodplain, and whether or not you might need to go to higher ground or think about sandbagging. But that's a good thing to check. And also check your insurance policies. One things we run into a lot around here is you might have damage for wind if a tree falls in your house, but then if the rain falls through the hole that the tree made, the water damage won't be covered. So there's some weird things in the policy that you might want to check if you live in the western part of the state. That some things are covered that aren't covered. You might think you're covered for all events. Some flooding is not covered if it's a certain type of flooding. So flood. We had one policy. I remember one of our investigative reporters did. It's really bizarre. Like, they were covered for like pipes breaking and flooding, but they weren't from flooding coming up through the foundation. It was really weird. It was a very weirdly written policy. So I would tell people to check those policies and make sure maybe put them in a weatherproof bag, or have some kind of digital version of it. So if there is damage, you have it ready to go, and take pictures of your property beforehand. This is what the house looked like. This is what the property looked like before the storm hit. So you have a reference point for filing these claims. And your car, it sounds silly, but don't park your car in a low spot. Get your car to a spot where it's not going to flood. We even talked about that at our station meeting today. Like, it seems like common sense, but don't park next to the storm drain. Don't park in the low culvert area. Park it. If you have to park it up on the grass or on a berm to get it up, you might want to do that to protect the car. Because a lot of us, like here at the station, we'll park our car and probably leave it there for a day and a half, because we'll be in the station sleeping and doing everything else, and we'll go out and our car's got water in it. So we just got to be really careful with our vehicles as well.
It's all good information, Brad. I know you've got to get back there and get ready for the 11 p.m. show. One last question, maybe kind of to sum up what you're expecting for your forecast area, your viewing area as of right now.
I'm expecting anything right now. No, it's like these events like this. You're like, man, I wish I could be forecasting snow like right now, because at least it'd be fun.
That's a good question, Brad. I was wondering myself, would I rather be forecasting a winter weather event or this? It seems like winter weather would be a little bit easier to hit.
The consequences from the winter event aren't as bad as they are for this. I'll tell you my one lesson in my career, having loved weather since I was 6, was I always loved bad weather, and I'm passionate about it. I get secretly excited for bad weather. I don't want anyone to get hurt. But after Hurricane Katrina and after going through that and seeing my coworkers impacted, it really changed my outlook a lot about tropical systems and flooding. And it really struck home to me how serious these are. When it personally affects you, then you kind of look at these systems a little bit different. Where, I had this saying for a long time. I see too many young people that are enthusiastic about weather root for storms. And I always say root for people, not for storms. So you should want this thing to miss us. I want to blow this forecast so nothing happens here. Not that I want to be wrong, but I would rather people be safe. So my concern and the thing I'm thinking about tonight in forecasting this is I would rather forecast snow because it's a lot easier to deal with and there's not as much property and lives at stake. This one is just not to be caught off guard. I think we focus too much on line tracks and where the storm is going. And when we realize the impacts are going to be a huge area of the Carolinas will be impacted. I thought I heard it today from one of the press conferences. Someone said every Carolinian was going to be impacted by the storm in some way or another, some more than others, but everybody was going to be impacted. And I thought that was a great statement because it's very true. On a scale from 1 to 10, some of us are going to be closer to the 1. Some of us are going to be 10, but none of us are going to be 0. So I think it's really important that everyone realizes to be ready no matter where you live, even if you're not at the coast.
All right. Well, thank you, Brad. You can stick around if you want, but I know you've got things to do, but we really appreciate you taking a little bit of time out to join us tonight.
Hey,
No
Scotty,
problem.
I got one more quick one for Brad if he's got 1 second. But I just wanted to let you know, Brad, that I actually just got a viewer message to my Facebook page, and they work with Duke Energy, and they're going to get me a press release of all their planned upcoming releases from their reservoirs. So I'll pass that along once I get it.
That's awesome. Great. Yeah, I'm glad to see. I mean, and the one thing about Duke Power, they've got staff of meteorologists up here in Charlotte. They're really good meteorologists, and they're usually on the ball with that stuff. They do a great job getting prepared for the storm. They obviously have a lot of infrastructure that they're worried about, so they are really on top of this stuff.
Right, and that'd be great for the folks that live downstream, these reservoirs.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us, Brad.
Thanks, guys.
Yes, thank you, Brad. We appreciate it. So that was kind of the latest on what to expect in the inlands areas of North Carolina. We've covered coastal South Carolina, coastal North Carolina. Chris, we've been having a lot of questions about the Columbia area and maybe the upstate of South Carolina. I know you're not going to be there because we're sending you out to be in the middle of this thing, but can you kind of give us an idea of what you are expecting right now, maybe Columbia, Greenville, Spartanburg, areas like that?
And that's a great question, Scotty. I'm glad you brought me in for that. I've been getting, oh my gosh, dozens upon dozens of messages from folks, I understand the concern and really want to know what's going to happen. And I think as we alluded to for the entire duration of this show, it's still uncertain. The confidence is low in any forecast. And me personally, I would rather tell people to prepare, for a significant rainfall and significant winds. If you live within the coast and if you live inland, like Brad said, depending on where the storm goes, where it sets up, you can experience a lot of rain, a lot of widespread flooding, a lot of river flooding, flash flooding, all of the above. Until the confidence is greater in the track, I think discussing specifics for locations is maybe a little too soon, and it wouldn't be accurate.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. I've been doing this 5 years and I forgot to unmute myself. I agree. I've been looking at your questions. What's it going to do in the Midlands? What's it going to do in Western North Carolina, the Raleigh area? As Brad, we asked Brad. Brad didn't really, he said there's a lot of variabilities. Chris just said a lot of variabilities. What we do know right now is Jared and Shay are most likely going to see effects from Florence, and then after that, where it goes, we just don't know yet, and we don't know those factors that's going to be in place over Western North Carolina and Central North Carolina and the Midlands and upstate of South Carolina. So with that, I know you guys have been monitoring our question feed here. So Any questions that kind of jump out to you all that we can answer? I know a lot of your questions are about specific areas, and we hope that we are able to answer them for you. There's a lot of questions about, should I evacuate, should I not? My advice to you is to contact your local emergency management office, especially if you live along the coast. But with that, have you guys seen anything that kind of just jumps out at you?
Yeah, I've had questions throughout the day of folks asking about what I keep seeing negative tide, and I want to kind of differentiate negative tide with negative storm surge, and not to be a correction police or anything, but negative tide is when anything's below zero, meaning low water mark, and we see that on full moons and new moons when the tide goes out further and is below zero, it's in the negative. So that's a negative tide. But negative storm surge is involved when you have strong winds, offshore winds, driving water away from the coastline out through the coastal breaks and into the ocean. So when we get that kind of effect, we have to consider where the storm is. So if we're far away enough from it, we're not going to see much of that negative storm surge occurring. We saw this with Matthew as it got just to the same latitude of Charleston. The wind switched up from the north and ultimately northwest, and we still had hurricane force gusts pushing that water out. I remember going to Breach Inlet and seeing 5 or 6 standing waves out there. It looked like a water, like the rapids. There was just so much water coming out. These waves were about 6 to 8 feet high. They're just sitting there. And it was the most incredible thing I've ever seen through that spit. And that was going on through all the spits nearby, especially to the north. But I'll go ahead and share a screen because we want to look at some of this information. And this is the ET surge map right here. And so since the hurricane watches have been issued and we have a whole new suite of data coming out that's filtering into these products, this is based off the GFS. And so we look at some of these folks, say Wrightsville Beach. And what we're looking at here is the black line is the forecast line. The blue line is the regular tide intervals that we would see in a normal tide graph. And you can see how far off this skews, even Saturday's surge going way up to 10 feet. I mean, these models are just sort of forecasting this right now, so these are not exact. But if you look at this surge on Friday morning, early at midnight, you're talking several feet above what it is already. The HAT letters over here, that means high astronomical tide. This is at the point where we start to see significant coastal flooding. And so you're still about almost 2.5 feet above the HAT value mark. So this is what the surge is all about, where we see these large numbers coming in way above the tide line. And I showed you the inundation map earlier, and we're going to see these numbers maybe jump around a little bit. If we go a little bit further into Wilmington, not so much there. The question is about Charleston. And what we see here Friday morning or into Friday afternoon with that wraparound northwest flow, sometimes we get a lower than normal low tide if the winds are strong enough. Now for Charleston, doesn't look to be that strong, maybe about a 1/2 foot difference in the lower tide. Also, the tide here is lower than normal for the high tide. So when you get a lot of water being blown out of an area, the water comes up short on both levels. So that's sort of the thinking there as far as the ET surge. So when we're interpreting the data, we have to consider that Spring-Made Pier considerably lower because they're closer to the storm. And this is Friday afternoon to Friday evening on the outgoing tide, where you end up with about 2 feet below normal at low tide and about 2.5 feet below normal at high tide. So, this is one of the products that we use to sort of guesstimate what the surge is going to be doing on the negative storm surge wraparound flow. But it all depends on where the storm goes.
Shay, one thing I want to ask you while you're talking about this, and for those folks who may not live it directly along the coast, maybe storm surge is kind of a foreign word to them. You kind of talk about what storm surge is for those folks who may not totally understand what that is.
Sure. So storm surge, let me go ahead and share a screen here. What we're talking about is a body of water that is pushed out ahead of a storm, and it depends on the category storm of the hurricane. So when we get to major status at Category 3, we're looking at a 9 to 12 foot storm surge. And that was showing in the NHC inundation maps earlier, plus 9 feet. Category 4 can carry up to 13 to 18 feet. We saw that here with Hugo. In fact, it's Highway 17 North leading out of Mount Pleasant. Far enough north towards Ondahl, you could see mud caked on the trees about 6 to 8 feet high. And the entire highway was completely underwater at that depth. So, the storm surge is basically you have this giant hurricane that's moving a large body of water into the coastline out ahead of it. there's so much energy wrapped around the swell heights are increased, and it's not just about waves, but just an entire body of water moving into the coastline all at one time. And so if the storm is coming in pretty quick, like we had with Katrina, it moved a lot of water into the coast. This one looks to slow down a little bit, so these storm surge heights may come down somewhat, but that's what the numbers are all about right there, 9 to 12 feet at a Category 3. That's sort of what the NHC is alluding to at this point. So that's pretty much it. And I wouldn't say the faster the storm, the higher the surge either. And the slower the storm, maybe a little bit less surge as well. It really takes sort of a medium there to get the full brunt of the surge to move into the coastline. It has to be going the right speed to get the maximum surge potential to go into the coast. So there's a little bit of science behind that as well. But that's the basic understanding, is that it's a large body of water being pushed ahead by the storm as it kicks up swells ahead of it into the coastline.
All right. Thank you for that, Shay. I've got one more question, just because this question I've seen's got so many likes on it. And it's a question I don't even know if you guys want to answer or go into. But Daniel Heston asked, if the panelists could pick one model to go with for now, which one would it be?
Oh.
Anybody want to take a stab at
I'll tell you what, I'm going to play it safe, and I'm going to go with the NAM 3 because it stops short at 60 hours until the next run. I'm going to leave it there.
If Shay's going to do the NAM 3, I'm going to go with the Her, because this is like 18 hours.
Oh, you got me. You undercut me. Wait, this isn't the Price is Right now. I mean, come on.
I'm going to DJX. They stopped running it 6 months ago.
So there you go, Daniel. We're not giving any favorites here. I will say historically, the European is pretty spot on, but it's not really done too well with this storm. But it is a little bit, maybe a little bit of relief to all of us that they're kind of showing the same thing now, and maybe we can just go from that and see what happens. So we have closed in and just past the 10 o'clock hour. Jared, I'm going to bring you in to kind of give us our latest update from the Hurricane Center, and we'll have the next advisory coming out at the top of the hour, and then we'll kind of transition to ending the show.
Yeah, Scotty, just to recap for everybody, thank you for watching this evening. It's been a great show. Been fantastic to have everybody, and by the way, what I'm showing you here, this is what you need to use to make decisions. Don't, there's a lot of people asking about the Euro and the GFS. Oh my God, the GFS is doing this, the Euro is doing that. Don't really focus on that. Those are raw materials for us to put this together for you. So stick with these guys. Hurricane Center, they're very good at what they do. And so to get into that again, we're going to get a new track and forecast, intensity forecast here in about an hour. Less than an hour, but as of 8 o'clock, Florence has 140 mile an hour maximum sustained winds. Was moving west-northwest at 17 miles per hour, and still, as of this advisory, was going to hone in on roughly anywhere between roughly Georgetown or the Outer Banks. Anywhere in there is probably statistically likely to have some problems with the center. This track could shift. We've seen some things in the models today, but again, everybody along the Carolina coast needs to be getting ready, and inland for that matter, needs to be getting ready for a possible hurricane strike, and then a storm pumping the brakes, slowing down, hanging around for a couple of days, dumping a ton of rain. So again, everybody, we need just be careful here. We've got hurricane warnings out from South Santee River all the way up into the top of the Outer Banks at this point, to the north part of the Outer Banks, and then hurricane watches around that, including the Charleston, South Carolina metro area. So, and storm surge watches and warnings are out for those areas as well. So again, storm surge certainly a concern that we're going to need to keep an eye on. So again, check back with us at 11. We'll have it on all of our Carolina Weather Group social platforms, the new advisories. So, Scotty, back to you.
All right, thank you for that, Jared. As we go forward now, we plan to continue to bring you coverage throughout the event. We'll be streaming press conferences from state officials, from local and county government officials. We'll also hopefully be doing more of these. Tomorrow night, I'll be honest with you, we've kind of talked about this kind of not. I think we still have a show scheduled for tomorrow. There's been so much going on. I don't know the status update on that yet. But we'll definitely, if we're going to have a show, if we're not going to have a show, we'll put that on our social media platforms. But look for updates throughout the rest of the week, and especially as Florence moves towards the coastline, we'll definitely be updating. I know Shay is going to be doing updates on his meteorologist page. As it seems like, Shay, you do it like every hurricane advisory that comes out, you're covering that. So we'll be streaming that on our platform. And then we're also going to have Chris out in the field. He's going to be stationed along the South Carolina coast. Chris, do you want to kind of tell us what do you have in an idea of what you're going to be doing for the next few days?
Oh yeah, Scotty. So next few days, long days. Looking forward to them. But me and Ricky were talking earlier. Ricky Matthews, who also joins us here on the Carolina Weather Group. But we were talking earlier, and he's going to try to join me if he can. See what our time constraints are like, and from there go down toward I guess the Myrtle Beach, North Myrtle Beach area, and really scout the area. And I got some local contacts in there I'm going to be providing some updates with and things of that nature. What we want to really do is be able to provide our viewers with content as the storm approaches, gets going, and a first look at after the storm, I guess, kind of winds down along the coast. Once that's over, come back home, because there's where this storm makes landfall, it's going to be I lost my camera here. It's going to be a big event, so that's important.
Definitely. So, Chris, we know that you will be you'll be out there. So we're happy that you're going to be providing this coverage, and we're going to keep all of you folks up to date. Anybody have any closing thoughts? I'm getting the "Let's Go Scotty" text from our executive producer James Brierton. So, anybody else have any closing thoughts?
One closing thought from me, and that is don't think that forecast track, that forecast cone that you see is exact. It is subject to change. I wouldn't be surprised if we wake up tomorrow and find that the hurricane warnings have extended further south than what it's showing right now. That may not happen. It may happen, but don't be surprised if it does. Make sure that you keep an open mind to the fact that there's a high amount of uncertainty as this nears the land. And back to you, Scotty.
All right, thank you for that, Shay. So stick with us here at the Carolina Weather Group. We're going to keep you updated throughout this on all of our social media platforms. We'll be doing more videos and more live updates for our panelists, James Brierton, or for Jared Smith, Chris Jackson, and Shay Gibson. I'm Scotty Powell for our executive producer, James Brierton. We hope that you all stay safe out there. If you're on the coastline, we hope that you evacuate at least tomorrow, and just stay out of the path of this storm. And we'll be here to give you updates throughout the rest of the week. So you guys have a great night. Stick around for more updates. And as always, we welcome your questions. Even when we're not doing these live broadcasts, we'll try to get to as many as we can. I'm meteorologist Scotty Powell here for the Carolina Weather Group. We hope you have a great night, and we'll talk to you later.